Hi, the library has asked me to do another series of history about Leduc. We're going to concentrate this time on three particular stories. One, how did the library come into existence and what happened? Number two, how the Waldorf Hotel was destroyed in 1940. And the third and final story will be about Bob Edwards, the gentleman that is responsible for the seed that became a Leduc representative. Back in 1907, the people of Leduc had to make a decision about how to use money. And one of the proposals was the expansion of the public school system. And they wanted to include a library. Unfortunately, the bylaw failed. So T.A. Norris, who proposed the bylaw to support a library, provided a grant of $1 up to $100 to purchase books. While waiting for the results of the vote, Mayor Getz donated 100 books to the fire brigade. But unfortunately, on December 9th, by the narrowest of margins, the bylaw failed to pass with a 23 votes in favor and 24 in opposition. Earlier that year, the Leduc Board of Trade decided to do their own library, and they heard about Lady Minto's offer. Now, Lady Minto was the Governor General's wife, and she had two major projects. One, to support local hospitals, and two, to support public libraries. Lady Minto had three conditions for donating books to the library. The first one was that they had to form a library board. The second one, they had to appoint a librarian. And the third one is they had to provide the books to the citizens for free. Well, the library board was formed, and they appointed a gentleman by the name of James Moody as the first librarian, unlike popular belief of Karl Martin. Now, Mr. Martin will play a key role a little bit later. James Moody ran a real estate agent and insurance business, and he donated his office space as well for the new library. Well, Lady Minto and her husband went off to India, where he became the Governor General for India. Upon her return, she approved the library proposal and arranged to have 8 boxes of books sent to Leduc. Now, how to pay for it? Library board formed, they gathered the money, they paid for it, and the books were being shipped. While they're being shipped, James Moody decides that his business will be expanded into another community where his son is living, and he leaves Leduc, leaving the library board without a librarian. And it's at this time that Karl Martin steps forward. Now, Karl Martin had been actively involved with the Agricultural Society and the new Board of Trade. He ran an implement dealership currently where the the Lighthouse company is now located. And he agreed. And he became technically the first official librarian for the Leduc Library. Unfortunately, in 1914, Mr. Martin sold his business and he moved to Balf, where he became the school principal, leaving the library without a librarian. The library disappeared. Today we don't know what happened to the books that Lady Minto volunteered and donated. But lo and behold, in 1946, the Women's Association, the Women's League, came forth to rekindle the idea of a library. Miss Kathleen Henderson, for the Leduc Women's Institute, formed the head committee to reconstitute the library. They had quite a time finding a location. For a while, it was in the town hall, but the town hall outgrew the library because the library grew, but space had to be needed for the fire department. So for a while in the middle 1950s, the Leduc women were very original. They went into Edmonton and bought a used streetcar and had it brought to Leduc, and they converted it into the library. Unfortunately, as the years grew on, the streetcar began to show its age, and it slowly deteriorated to a point that it became an eyesore. And the town council said, no, we need to have someplace else. So it went back to the town hall. And for many, many years, it operated out of the town hall. But again, the fire department's needs began to grow, and they were looking like they were going to be homeless. In 1983, however, when the city became a city, the Mayor Clark said we'll make room at the new Civic Center. And so the library opened up in 1983 at its current location, and then it grew, and it grew, and it grew. So in 2015, a new addition was made, and that's the one we are currently in. Our next story is a story about Waldorf Hotel. It begins all the way back in 1899 with Robert Telford. Telford decided then that the land around Leduc was too rich to ignore. He had taken samples throughout his whole career as a Northwest Mounted Police, and the Leduc area had the richest soil, and he knew that settlers would be coming. So in 1899, he and a partner, our Northwest Mounted Police officer, began to build construction that he built oversized, because he knew the stagecoach line was going to need a stopping place. After completing it, he left his partner in charge, and he went back to Michigan to marry his wife. They returned. In 1891, the area became known as the Leduc Hamlet, but everybody called it Telford's Place after the station that he had developed. Eventually, it got to be a little too much for him to do it on his farmland, so he moved the station across the railroad tracks onto the south side of Main Street, and then sold it to Mark Spencer, and it became known as Spencer House. In 1899, a gentleman by the name of Jerry Boyce came to town and bought the Spencer House from Mark Spencer. Mark used the money to build a lavish, at the time, home for his family. And Jerry Boyce began to develop the Waldorf Hotel. It started with Telford's Place original building. He expanded upon it, and it became eventually it would become a 3-story tall hotel. Jerry Boyce was a little bit of a hustler, a gambler, and a showman. He stayed for about a year, and in 1901, he sold it to Archie Archer, who developed it into a lavish hotel. His wife was a fantastic cook, and the hotel soon had a reputation with the traveling salesman as a fine dining place and a very cozy hotel. Its reputation grew, and it grew. And finally, Bruce Reed bought it from the family in 1939. 1940 disaster. Gentleman coming home from the Leduc hockey team was playing in the playoffs in Fort Saskatchewan, and the gentleman that had watched the game was just returning home when he noticed smoke coming from the basement of the hotel. Before the fire department could get there, it was an inferno. The barkeeper and the cook had to jump off the 15 feet into blankets held by the fire brigade in order to save their lives. The fire couldn't be put out, and the fire brigade, with the help from an Edmonton detachment, just tried to maintain the fire to the location. And across the street, a number of buildings were getting singed and were in danger of being engulfed in the flames. Fire department used metal screens to protect themselves from the fire, to direct the 3 fire hoses that they did to put out the flames. They weren't able to save the building, and in the morning, nothing but ashes remained of the Waldorf Hotel that could be traced all the way back to Telford. For 9 years, it remained an empty lot. Then in January 1949, after the Leduc #1 had come in, and after the tremendous need for hotel space in Leduc from the workers, the owner decided to rebuild. And on the morning in January of 1949, residents were surprised to see machines digging a basement, not where the hotel had been, but across the street on the north side, where it currently is. Within 6 months, the building was up and in operation, and the owner had added a bowling alley, a barber shop, a beauty parlor, and a drugstore. July 1949, and 15 months later, in November of 1950, there's an explosion just up the street when the Leduc Hotel is exploded and destroyed, leaving the Waldorf Hotel as the only hotel in the town of Leduc with a tremendous need for housing because of the exploration of the oil wells just to the west. The hotel was again gained a reputation of fine dining and great hospitality. And today, you can still walk into the hotel, take a tour around, and see some of the fabulous things that can be traced all the way back to the original hotel. In our new book, which we call Luke Linenel Volume 2 Footprints, we talk about the 3 amigos. These individuals came in 1899 and turned Leduc around. One of the gentlemen was Jerry Boyce. He bought the Waldorf Hotel and established a fine tradition of dining and hospitality. The second individual was a man by the name of Sam Gregory, and became Leduc's literally first barber. And he ran a barber shop while bartending at the hotel. And the third man, was probably the most famous of all, was Robert Chambers Edwards, known as Bob Edwards. Now, Bob Edwards was a very interesting gentleman. He was born in England. His mother died within a few months after his birth, and his dad died when he was about 8 years old on a cruise to New Zealand. So he grew up with 2 Aunt Spencers. They sent him to the best schools. The family was quite well to do, and he ended up going to Glasgow University. Upon graduating, actually I don't think Bob really graduated. At any rate, he went to Europe. And his mother's father owned a major publishing company in England at the time. Bob began to write a story about his travels and turned it into a news sheet called The Traveler. Well, about 1895, Bob and his brother James decided they wanted a new adventure, and they headed out for Texas. For some reason, they ended up in Wyoming, where Bob's brother, still part of the family, had the wealth, and he bought a ranch. They developed it for a few years, and Bob again got tired of it and headed towards Iowa, where he got a job as a farmhand. Well, the owner was not very nice to Bob, played cruel tricks on him. Bob wrote to his brother, and the next thing you know, James had bought the ranch. Once again, Bob, his wanderlust got the better of him, and he began to wander around. Now, Bob admired various types of drinks and often partook in them. And because of that reputation, he was basically disowned from the family. And before you know it, Bob's in Winnipeg looking for work. There's nothing there. And he ends up being told by somebody that there's opportunity in Alberta along the Calgary Edmonton Railroad line. So Bob uses the last of his money and buys a ticket. It takes him to Sidon 16, where he runs out of money, comes off the train in a place that will be called Wetaskiwin. He ends up spending the night in a livery stable, and the livery owner hears about his story and tells Bob, hey, we're building a new school and we need workers. So Bob gets a job working and constructing a new school. Shortly after that, Mr. Jerry Boyce comes to Wetaskiwin and buys what was called the Walker House and begins to convert it into a hotel. Bob comes in, they talk, they get along, and before you know it, Boyce hires Bob as a second bartender. His first bartender, Sam Gregory, has a skill to cut hair, and so when he's cutting hair, Bob's tending bar. Bob had a lot of time on his hands during the day, so he began to sketch the customers that came in, and he had a knack for it. And so Boyce began to post the sketches on the walls of the bar, which drew more people. And Boyce also used Bob to make pamphlets to advertise the hotel. The druggist, Walker, convinces Bob to start a news sheet. Now, here's some of the reasons why they liked Bob Edwards, for some of his quick wit. Here are 3 examples. If you want work well done, select a busy man. The other kind has no time. The second one, don't meet trouble halfway. It's got its ability to make the entire journey on its own. And the third, perhaps more interesting one because it can apply to today's world, was one that he said, now I know what a statesman is. It's a dead politician. We need more statesmen. It would, however, be his ability to sketch and to write that would lead him to developing the first newspaper. He began in that livery stable that he had stopped off on, with a table and a desk. And then he moved into a butcher shop. And the name of the paper was the Wetaskiwin Freelance. It would continue until he left the area. Now, when he came to Leduc, he continued the tradition of a newspaper. He called it the Alberta Sun. And the Edmonton Bulletin several times makes comments on what a fine newspaper it was. But the problem with Bob was he was always satirical, and some people didn't understand it. And when he began to call Leduc Pork Town, he lost favor with a lot of his advertisers. But before they shut him down, Bob sold the paper and would leave the area, moving to High River. And in High River, he would develop a paper that would become known as the Eyeopener. And the Eyeopener was extremely well liked, with over 40,000 subscribers by the time he shut the paper down. Actually, he never did shut the paper down. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 57, a little bit too hard living, and the paper kind of dissolved. Before he died, he was so popular throughout the nation that he was invited to go to the east to set up the Eyeopener there. But he didn't have the contacts, and he returned back to Calgary and finished his career as the editor of the Eyeopener. But he also spent a few months as a representative, as a member of legislation in Alberta's legislative body. He was elected, gave his meeting speech, but then suffered a heart attack, returned to Calgary, and died. But from his sale of the paper here, it was sold to an Australian. He called the paper the Leduc Record. He in turn sold it, and the paper changed its name to the Leduc Enterprise. And then Dr. Barker bought it and the paper became known as the Leduc Representative. And thankfully, the Representative in 1989 did an amazing feat of recording on microfilm all of the papers, or most of the papers, from 1907 to 1989. And those are some of the records we have used to tell you these stories. In our final story here, I want to thank the Leduc Library for making it possible for us to do these videos. I also want to let you know that the Leduc Library has on sale the history book, Leduc Then and Now. And it is available at the library. I think it's for $20, and proceeds go to the library. However, we have a second book coming out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We call it Leduc Then and Now, Volume 2, Footprints. I won't tell you what's in the book, but I will ask you some questions. Do you know the connection between Leduc and Bouchard Gardens in British Columbia? Do you know why Alton Drive is who Alton Drive is named after? Do you know that the land that South Forks subdivision lives on, the family had a major tragedy in 1907? And the other question that we answer is, why did Father Leduc stop at a critical time to send a telegram, and a guy by the name of McKinley recorded it, changed the station's name to Leduc? And what happened to McKinley? All these questions are answered in our new book. Thank you for listening.